Molla and Nazia stood in the prison yard, watching as the inmates lined up for lunch. Large pots of food were being ladled out by other prisoners, and the scent of boiled lentils and spices filled the air. The two journalists were on a mission to learn more about Hasna, the enigmatic inmate who was due to be persecuted in just a few days. They knew that they had a crucial task ahead of them, and they wanted to gather as much information as possible before they interviewed her. She does not talk to many people. Or you can say, other inmates, avoid her. There are rumors that once a woman tried to talk to her, but she broke her teeth. Another time, an old woman was assigned to stay with her. A few days later, the woman died. Police said that the old woman died a natural death. But the rumors are the old woman had a serious problem with snoring. So she killed her by strangling her with a pillow. Since she was already sentenced to death, police didn't dig this case very much. Another woman said while pouring a spoon of dal. One of the inmates complained about how the lentil soup actually is water with turmeric. The inmate who was serving the food barked at her and said, "If you don't like it, then no need to eat it." Molla felt a shiver run down her spine as she listened, but she was determined to get to the bottom of the story. Just then, a curious young woman approached them, carrying a tray of food. She had tied her hair in a bun and was wearing the inmates' clothes. But her clothes looked much cleaner than the rest of the inmates. "Excuse me," she said, looking at the reporter. "I heard you're here to interview Hasna. I can tell you a little bit about her if you'd like." Nazia perked up. "Yes, please. Anything you can tell us would be helpful." The woman sat down at their table and began to speak. "Hasna is a very private person," she said. "She doesn't talk to many people, and she keeps to herself. But I've seen her do some remarkable things. There's something about her that's both terrifying and equally amazing. I have heard that she killed one of her husbands and then chewed his liver just like this." She bit into her flatbread. Just then, another woman joined the conversation. "And don't forget about the women who used to visit her," she said. "She died a few days later. The police say it was a natural death, but there are rumors that Hasna killed her from the prison using her connections. Since that woman could not get out of the prison." Molla's heart skipped a bit. She listened intently, scribbling notes in his diary as Nazia captured the conversation on camera. She felt a growing excitement as she learned more about Hasna, and she knew that she was getting closer to uncovering the truth. And as the woman finished her story, she made a mental note to ask Hasna about it when she had the chance. Strich. Molla and Nazia entered the dimly lit cell, their footsteps echoing in the quiet space. A figure was seated on a small cot in the corner, her long dark hair spread across her face like a veil. Hasna wore a traditional white salwar kameez, befitting her Bangladeshi heritage. As they approached, Molla noticed the delicate features of Hasna's face, marred only by a small scar on her right cheek. Despite her reputation as one of the most dangerous prisoners in the jail, there was something almost fragile about her. "Hello Hasna," Molla said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're here to interview you for a news story. I'm Molla, and this is Nazia." Hasna said nothing, her head still bowed. Molla cleared her throat and began the interview. "Can you tell us about your background? How did you end up here?" There was no response from Hasna, and Molla exchanged a worried look with Nazia. They had heard rumors that Hasna rarely spoke to anyone, but they had hoped that she would be more forthcoming in an interview. Hasna still didn't answer. The room was filled with an eerie silence. Suddenly, Hasna stood up and walked towards the iron bars of her cell. Molla and Nazia exchanged a quick glance, both realizing the danger they were in. They quickly gathered their things and left the cell, their hearts racing. They both knew they had to be careful with the information they gathered and how they portrayed Hasna in their story. After all, she was still a human being, regardless of her past actions. "Is it true you killed 7 men?" Nazia asked curiously. She couldn't limit her curiosity anymore, since Hasna didn't look anything as she imagined. She thought Hasna would be someone with a monstrous look. After all, killing 7 men is not child's play. She realized her mistake when Molla glared at her. Nazia realized her mistake and became silent. Hasna was still silent. She just stood there, her eyes fixated on something beyond the walls of the jail. It was as if she was looking at something far, far away. The silence was deafening, and the stillness of her body was eerie. The creaking sound of the old wooden cot could be heard in the background. Then slowly, Hasna raised her eyes and looked directly at Nazia, piercing her with a cold, unreadable gaze. The hair on the back of Nausea's neck stood on end as she felt a chill run down her spine. Hasna's eyes were dark, almost black, and her expression was blank, unreadable. Suddenly she said, "What will you do after knowing my story? It's a waste of everyone's time. Just leave." Nausea and Mala were taken aback by her sudden reply. They looked at each other and then back at Hasna. Nausea tried to reason with her, "But Hasna, the world wants to know your story. Your story can inspire so many people. It can help people understand what led you to do what you did." Hasna looked up and her eyes met with Nausea's. Her eyes were filled with pain and sadness. She replied in a calm voice, "Inspire? To do what? To kill people." She said with a hint of bitterness in her voice. "I am not someone who should be looked up to or admired. I am a convicted murderer, sentenced to die for my crimes. There is no romanticizing or justifying the taking of another human life. If you truly want to make an impact with your writing, then write about the things that can better our society and benefit the next generation. Highlight the importance of kindness, compassion, and morality in today's world. That is a story worth telling." If they didn't know about her truth, then they definitely would have thought she was a protagonist fighting for justice. But the situation was completely opposite here. Her words stung them. Both Nausea and Mala felt irritated. They didn't come here to hear a murder convict lecture them on morals and virtues. "Is that so? Why did you kill those innocent men? Didn't you kill them for money? First, trapping them in love marriage, then killing them. Yet, you have the audacity to lecture us? Whom are you trying to fool?" Nausea taunted. Nausea's words were harsh and cutting, and they seemed to hit Hasna like a physical blow. Hasna's face hardened, and she locked eyes with Nausea, unblinking. "You're right," she said slowly. "I did kill those men. And I did it for money. But what good is money when you're locked up in a cell, counting down the days until your own death?" Hasna's voice became quiet and sad. "I have made mistakes, terrible mistakes. And I regret my actions. Go and write that, I have realized my mistakes. Go and tell everyone that, I want to turn the wheel of time and save them all. Because I have learned my lesson." The room was filled with a heavy silence after she finished speaking, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Strich. As Mala and Nausea left the cell, they whispered to each other with a hint of skepticism. "Did you see that? That's how she traps people. Pretending to have remorse when she's about to die," Nausea said in a hushed tone. Mala nodded in agreement, "Absolutely. Don't be fooled by her words. If she ever gets out of prison, she'll be back to her old ways in no time." With those words, they walked away, leaving Hasna alone with her thoughts. Strich.
Hasna's heart pounded violently in her chest as she was led toward the execution room. The thought of death was overwhelming, and the image of those she had wronged flashed in her mind, faces she couldn't bear to remember. Perhaps this is how they had felt before their lives were taken. Now she was feeling that same terror. Fear and uncertainty were the only emotions she could grasp. She wondered desperately if Allah had forgiven her for her actions. The thought of eternal punishment in Jahannam filled her with dread. As they made their way to the platform, Hasna couldn't stop thinking about her grave and the loneliness that awaited her in the cold, unyielding darkness. But she clung to her faith, reminding herself that Allah was her only hope, her only refuge. The guards blindfolded her, tying a cloth tightly around her head, and guided her up to the platform where the rope awaited her. The noose was snug around her neck, and she could feel its rough weight pressing into her chest. Her nerves were frayed, fear gnawing at her insides, leaving her feeling utterly alone. The room was filled with others condemned to the same fate, their silent terror mirroring her own. Hasna inhaled deeply, trying to summon the strength to face her fate. She didn't want to die. She needed another chance, one last chance at life. But as the moment drew closer, the fear of death consumed her, leaving her feeling hollow, like a shell of the person she once was. Her mind raced as she stood on the scaffold, the noose biting into her skin. A deep sense of regret and fear washed over her as she realized that her life was about to end. The roughness of the rope rubbed against her neck, sending shivers down her spine. She wondered how many others had stood where she now stood, their final moments ticking away as they faced the end. The fear was suffocating, making it difficult to stand. She wanted to run, to escape the reality of what was about to happen, but there was no escape. The room was thick with the sound of muffled sobs and occasional whimpers from other prisoners, each one gripped by their own terror. Closing her eyes, memories of her past flooded her mind. There had been so few moments of true happiness in her life, but in that instant, even the smallest joys felt precious. She whispered to herself, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un," a reminder that to Allah we belong, and to Him we shall return. Her heart raced as she repeated the phrase, "La ilaha illahu Muhammadan Rasulullahi." She sought strength and peace in these final moments, hoping against hope that Allah would grant her forgiveness. The fear and sadness were overwhelming, and she braced herself for the angel of death, who seemed to be drawing ever nearer. But it was not easy. The weight of the moment was crushing, and she shook uncontrollably, her fear manifesting in trembling limbs. Death was terrifying, no matter how much strength or courage one possessed. Hasna was no exception. She was human, fragile, and filled with emotions. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out to Allah, pleading for mercy and forgiveness. Allah, please help me. I don't want to die now. Oh Allah, please forgive all my sins. Ya Rahman, please bestow your mercy upon me. The words echoed in her mind as she wept uncontrollably. The people around her pitied her, but they knew she had to face the consequences of her actions. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. She watched as the executioner received a signal and reached for the lever. Her heart raced with terror, and she bit down hard on her inner lip, trying to hold on to the last moments of her life. Tears flowed freely as she called out to Allah, her pleas for forgiveness and mercy becoming increasingly desperate. The weight of impending death pressed down on her, so intense she feared her heart might stop before the rope even tightened. In these final moments, she clung to her faith, calling upon the infinite mercy of Allah, hoping for a reprieve. Suddenly, the tense silence was shattered by the sound of a door bursting open. A figure rushed into the room, panting, their face marked by urgency. They pushed past the guards, thrusting a piece of paper into the hands of the police officer in charge. The officer's brows furrowed as he read the document, then immediately signaled to the executioner to halt. Muted whispers rippled through the room as the officer stepped away to confer with other officials. Hasna, lost in her own fear, barely registered the commotion around her. Suddenly she felt a warm hand at her neck, and then, with a jolt of disbelief, the noose was untied and removed. She exhaled deeply, unaware until that moment that she had been holding her breath. Dazed and confused, Hasna struggled to comprehend what was happening. She was led off the platform and back to her prison cell. A guard informed her that she was fortunate, her execution had been postponed due to new evidence presented on her behalf. The words barely registered. Could it be true? Had she really been given another chance at life? Back in her cell, Hasna sat down, her mind a whirlpool of emotions, relief, confusion, gratitude, and lingering fear. The weight of impending death had been lifted, but uncertainty about the future now took its place. She had been granted more time, but what would she do with it? The question lingered in her mind, as heavy and persistent as the noose that had just been removed from her neck.
Hasna was being transported to a new prison in a car with 2 female officers and 1 male officer. As she stared out the window at the passing streets, a wave of regret washed over her. She had taken her freedom for granted, never appreciating the simple ability to move around as she pleased. Now, with her freedom stripped away, she realized just how blessed she had been. Despite facing execution, she felt an unexpected sense of gratitude for the few extra days she had been granted. She was thankful to witness the streets, the people, and the sky, even if only through the small car window. Gratitude filled her heart, mingling with the fear of what lay ahead. Suddenly, the police jeep came to a halt. At first, Hasna thought nothing of it, assuming it was just a minor car issue. But moments later, one of the female officers instructed her to step out of the vehicle. As she obeyed, she noticed another car waiting nearby with 3 strangers inside. Unease crept into her as she realized the officers weren't getting out with her. Sensing her confusion, one of the officers explained, "These individuals will be taking you to the new prison." Hasna's heart raced, but she remained silent, wary of what might happen if she questioned the situation too much. The strangers seemed impassive, their faces unreadable as they motioned for her to get into the car. As the vehicle started moving, Hasna's eyes stayed glued to the streets, trying to memorize the route. An hour passed, and she began to feel increasingly uneasy. Something wasn't right. This isn't the road to Chittagong. Where are you taking me? She demanded, her voice betraying her rising panic. The woman seated next to her turned around, her expression calm, almost too calm. Don't worry, she said smoothly. We're taking a detour. We have some paperwork to finish in another city before we head to the new prison. But Hasna wasn't convinced. Her gut told her something was terribly wrong. She tried to stay calm, but the fear was gnawing at her, making her feel trapped and helpless. The uncertainty was unbearable. Where were they really taking her? And what would happen to her once they got there? Suddenly, panic overtook her. Without thinking, she lunged for the door, trying to escape. But the female officer beside her reacted swiftly, grabbing Hasna's arm in a vice-like grip. Let me go. Hasna screeched, thrashing in a desperate attempt to break free. Then she felt a sharp sting in her neck. Her hand instinctively flew to the spot, but her vision was already blurring. The last thing she heard before darkness swallowed her was the officer's cold voice. Don't worry. She won't be causing any more trouble. When Hasna woke up, she found herself in a small, exquisitely decorated room with a plush bed and a soft comforter. The room was cozy, with a gentle breeze wafting through the open window. For a brief moment, she felt relief, allowing herself to enjoy the pleasant surroundings. But then the memories rushed back, and panic set in again. She jumped off the bed and ran to the door, only to find it locked. Frantically, she rushed to the window, hoping for a way out, but was met with a breathtaking view of the sparkling sea. The waves crashed onto the shore below, mocking her with their freedom. Hasna's heart pounded as the realization hit her. She was being held captive in this idyllic location. But why? And by whom? 1,000 questions raced through her mind as she desperately searched the room for any means of escape. Fear gripped her as dark thoughts flooded her mind. Was she here for some nefarious purpose? She screamed, "Why have you brought me here?" Her voice echoed through the room, but no answer came. She screamed again, "Why have you brought me here? I want to go back to prison. I want to go back." Zilengse. The only response was the mocking crash of the waves outside. She tried to calm herself, breathing deeply as she surveyed the room again. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe there was a reason she was brought here. But what? In the corner of the room, she noticed a small table with food and water. Her stomach growled, reminding her how hungry she was. She approached the table cautiously, her hands trembling as she picked up the food. It tasted good, almost too good, and as she ate, a small sense of normalcy returned, albeit briefly. The food was delicious, and the water was refreshing, but the locked door and unanswered questions lingered in her mind, casting a shadow over everything. After finishing her meal, Hasna tried the door again, pulling on the handle with all her strength. It wouldn't budge. She felt trapped, a prisoner in a gilded cage. Defeated, she sat on the bed, her mind churning with thoughts of escape and the unknown motives of her captors. Time passed slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. Restless, she began pacing the room, inspecting every inch for clues. That's when she noticed a small piece of paper on the floor. She picked it up, her heart pounding as she read the message. "Don't worry, you are safe here. We will explain everything soon." A small wave of relief washed over her, but it was quickly drowned by a flood of questions. Safe? How could she be safe when she had no idea where she was or who had brought her here? She sat down again, clutching the note, waiting anxiously for the promised explanation. Later, as the day wore on, Hasna found herself praying, seeking solace in her faith. Tears streamed down her face as she prostrated, her heart heavy with fear and confusion. She poured out her anguish to Allah, begging for guidance and strength. When she finished her prayer, she sat on the bed, a strange calm settling over her. Looking out the window, she saw the vast expanse of the sea, the moon shining brightly in the night sky, and the stars twinkling like distant hopes. The beauty of the scene captivated her, momentarily taking her mind off her predicament. She lost herself in the view, imagining for just a moment that she was free, that all of this was a dream. But then the door creaked open, pulling her back to reality. Hasna sat alone in the dimly lit room, her mind heavy with the weight of uncertainty. She had no idea what was coming next, and the not knowing gnawed at her, making each passing minute feel like an eternity. The door creaked open again, and an old woman stepped into the room. Hasna's eyes widened in alarm, and she instinctively backed away, pressing herself against the farthest wall. "Don't be afraid," the old woman said softly, extending her hand. In it was a phone. "Take this." Hasna hesitated, confusion and fear swirling within her as she accepted the phone. Before she could even unlock it, a voice spoke from the other end, an anonymous caller. "Marry me," the voice said, the words landing like a punch in Hasna's gut. Her eyes widened in shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Who was this person? Why were they offering her marriage? And why on earth would anyone want to marry a convicted murderer? "Who are you?" Hasna asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. "I'm just a man who has been watching you," the voice replied, calm and measured. "I know everything about you, and I want to give you a chance at a new life." Hasna was speechless, her mind reeling. The idea of marrying a stranger, someone she had never even seen, was absurd. And yet, the desperation in her heart made her consider it, even if just for a moment. A new beginning, away from all this? The thought was tempting, but could she trust this mysterious stranger? "I know you're confused, but you don't have anything to lose," the caller continued. "I can help you start over, away from all of this. Away from everything that's happened to you." Hasna's heart raced, her mind a whirlwind of fear, hope, and suspicion. Trapped in a room with a phone and an anonymous voice offering her a way out, it seemed like an impossible decision. Yet, at this point, any chance at life, no matter how slim, was worth considering. "But why?" she asked, her voice cautious, her guard still up. "Who in their right mind would ever marry a convicted murderer? Do you know I'm a murder convict? 2 days ago, I was about to be executed. I'm still a murder convict. They were supposed to take me to a new jail, but instead, they brought me here." The voice on the other end fell silent for a few moments, as if weighing her words. "So you really did kill those men," he said finally. Hasna nodded, though he couldn't see her. "Yes." "Why?" he pressed, his tone curious rather than judgmental. "I did it for money," Hasna admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you regret your actions?" "Yes, I do," she replied, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her. "Do you want to help the victims' families?" the voice asked, his tone softening. "Definitely," she said, without hesitation. There was a pause, and then the stranger made an unexpected proposal. "If you marry me, I will give each of the victims' families 1 lakh takas." Hasna's eyes widened in surprise, but almost immediately, she shook her head. "I don't need your money," she said firmly. "I've saved some money from selling baskets in jail, and I'll give it to them myself." Her suspicions deepened. She feared that he might have ulterior motives, that perhaps he wanted to marry her only to harm her later, maybe even to claim some kind of insurance money. Dark scenarios played out in her mind as she considered the possibilities. Sensing her hesitation, the voice on the other end spoke again, his tone reassuring. "I understand you may not trust me, but I'm sincere in my offer. I want to help the victims' families, and I want to help you too. I know it sounds strange, but I've been following your case closely, and I believe in your innocence. I want to give you a chance to start over and make things right." Hasna felt a lump in her throat, her emotions swirling in a confusing mix of fear, hope, and skepticism. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Why would you do this for me? What do you want in return?" The stranger took a deep breath before answering, "A lot. I want a lot from you. But most importantly, I want to be your protector and provider. I can stop your execution. I'll ensure the victims' families are compensated. And I will give you a place to call home. Now, Hasna, will you marry me? Let me remind you, you don't have many options. But if you choose me, I will be your husband, your guardian, inshallah." Hasna was stunned into silence. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. For some reason, the tears kept coming, even though she wasn't sure why. "Yes," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. She wasn't entirely sure what she was agreeing to, but in that moment, it felt like the only lifeline she had left.